Hi, I'm Kaylin. My family used to call me the leftover. At dinner, they laughed when I ordered water and took the bus home. My sister smirked. Still can't afford a car? But last night, her laughter died the moment she saw the ring on my finger. Mom froze. Dad turned pale. And my sister? Her mouth stayed open long after I said, "Oh, this. Just something I picked up. On a slow day." But here's what they never knew. The silence they mistook for weakness was where I planted my revenge. Want to hear how deep the roots go? Before we dive in, what time are you listening and where are you from? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. The sun had nearly disappeared behind the palms when I turned onto my old street in Pasadena. I hadn't seen this house in years, but the curve of the road still stirred something familiar and cold. Cars lined both sides like it was Sunday brunch at the country club. I had to park 2 blocks down, right next to someone's overflowing garbage bins. That felt about right. As I walked toward the house, I slowed my steps. Not out of hesitation, just preservation, the kind you learn to do after years of being made to feel like you take up too much space. The porch lights were already on. Same porch swing, same black shutters, same doormat with the embroidered phrase, "Langley family, built on grace." I stared at it for a long moment, then stepped over it without wiping my boots. Inside, the scent of lemon polish mixed with roasted turkey. The hallway echoed with voices, laughter, silverware clinking, something bubbling on the stove. I unbuttoned my coat, suddenly too warm. No one came to greet me. I turned the corner into the dining room. Every chair was full, except, of course, for the one at the far end of the table, shoved back like it was an afterthought. My sister Isolde looked up, her gaze drifting slowly from my shoes to my hair. "Still taking the bus, Kaylin?" Her voice was soft, but every syllable cut like old glass. Dad didn't even look up from his plate, just grunted. Mom turned slightly and pressed her lips into a tight, thin line, like she'd just caught a whiff of something unpleasant. I stepped toward the empty chair. No one moved. I pulled it out myself, sat down without a word, and folded the napkin across my lap. The scraping of my chair against the wood floor felt louder than it should have. A few heads turned, but no one spoke to me directly. Isolde raised a glass of red. "To family," she smiled. "Even the ones who pop up like ghosts." No one laughed, but no one stopped her either. Mom's eyes flicked to my coat. "Still wearing that?" she asked. "It's cashmere," I said. Her mouth twitched. "Vintage?" I didn't answer. Instead, I picked up my fork and focused on the sweet potatoes. I hadn't come here to fight. Not yet. Conversation flowed, but never toward me. Isolde launched into a long description of her new real estate firm in Beverly Hills. Something about celebrity clients and a potential TV show. Dad nodded with approval. Mom chimed in about last week's charity auction at the church. "We raised over 30 grand, she said proudly, all going to the stained glass restoration." Someone complimented the turkey. Someone else laughed about tennis club politics. I ate in silence, aware of the occasional glance cast my way, like I was something they'd tried to scrub clean but couldn't quite get rid of. And then the question came. "So, Kaylin," Mom said, her tone falsely light, "how's everything? Still working that project?" Before I could answer, Isolde leaned in. "Or did the city finally evict you from that shoebox apartment?" I set my fork down carefully. Silence wrapped around the table like fog. I reached for my water glass. As I did, my sleeve slipped up, just enough to reveal the glint of a diamond ring. Not just any ring, a rare, unmistakable cut, limited edition, quietly powerful. Mom's eyes widened. Dad blinked hard. Isolde's jaw tensed. "Is that?" Mom started, voice catching. I looked down, turning the ring slowly with my thumb. "Oh, this?" I said. "Just something I picked up on a quiet Tuesday." No one spoke. The clatter of silverware had stopped. The heat from the dining room seemed to rise and settle on my skin. I looked at each of them slowly, Mom, Dad, Isolde, and saw it clearly. the question blooming in their eyes, pressed against their teeth, but not yet spoken. How? But I wasn't going to explain, not tonight. I wasn't here to boast. I sipped my water. Then I smiled. But I'm not here to talk about jewelry, I said softly. I'm here for her. I didn't wait for their questions. I stood slowly, letting the legs of my chair scrape lightly against the floor. My voice was steady. I'm not here to talk about jewelry. I'm here for her. The room hushed, an unease that slid under the skin like a draft from a cracked window. I turned my gaze toward the far end of the table. That chair. It stood untouched, like it always had. No cushion, no silverware, no plate. Just the oak frame, slightly worn at the arms from years of her knitting needles tapping as she worked. I remembered brushing crumbs off the seat for her when I was a teenager. She always smiled, called me her quiet hawk, watchful, fierce, and never loud. But tonight, there was nothing. Not even acknowledgement. I asked, not accusing, just low and honest. Did no one set a place for her? A clink of a fork on porcelain. Mom didn't look at me as she answered, She's not coming back, Kaylin. No, I replied, nodding once. Neither am I. Not if this is how you choose to remember her. A few seconds passed. Nobody said a word. I turned back to my plate, but I couldn't eat anymore. I stared at the mashed potatoes like they held an answer I wasn't ready to see. My heart thudded, quiet, but relentless. It was never about the food. It was about her. Always was. I blinked, and just like that, I was back there, standing in the old kitchen with its flickering light bulb and her tiny frame hunched at the table, her wool shawl tight around her shoulders. She'd been too weak to hold a spoon that night, so I sat beside her and fed her the warm soup I'd made after my double shift at the diner. My hands had trembled from exhaustion, but I steadied them. She'd watched me, her eyes clouded but clear in their affection. One day, she whispered, it'll be you they wait for. I had laughed then, tired, uncertain. Me? You give more than any of them will ever admit, she said, breathing slow. But you'll see. They'll learn. I hadn't believed her. Not really. But now, looking at that empty chair, her chair, I wasn't so sure anymore. A sharp sound snapped me back. Isolde stood up to pour more wine, brushing past me with a smirk. I saw her glance toward the hallway where family photos used to hang. I followed her gaze. Something felt wrong. I excused myself and walked quietly toward the hallway. The moment I reached it, my breath caught. The pictures, dozens of them once lined the wall, were different now. Grandma's framed photo at the center, her young smile in a rose garden, gone. In its place was a glossy ad for Isolde's real estate business. Dad's golf trophies lined the sideboard where Grandma's needlepoint had once rested. Every trace of her was replaced by achievement. Surface. Nothing soft. Nothing real. I reached out, fingers brushing the cold frame of Isolde's promotional plaque. My voice dropped, quiet enough not to shake the room but strong enough to shake the ground. She built this house with her hands. Isolde didn't miss a beat. And you ruined it with your tears. I turned slowly, met her eyes. No, I said. I just refused to sell her for status. That hit harder than I expected. Her face didn't move much, but something flickered behind her lashes. She turned away. Dinner wrapped in uncomfortable silence after that. The kind that hums in your bones. I helped clear the plates, but no one thanked me. That part never changed. Later, as I rinsed dishes in the kitchen, Mom cornered me. She stood beside the fridge like she used to when I was a kid, and she needed to deliver a quiet scolding. But this time, her tone wasn't soft. You came back for her money, didn't you? I wiped my hands with a towel before turning around. No. I came back to see what she was right about. Her brows furrowed. What are you talking about? I stepped closer. She left me more than memories, and your face tells me you already know that. For the first time all evening, Mom looked rattled. Her hand clutched the counter behind her, subtle but tight. You don't know what you're saying, she muttered. But I did. And she knew it. I didn't reply. I walked out of the kitchen and into the hall again, reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the shawl, the same one Grandma Liza wore every winter. Pale lavender with tiny pearls she'd sewn in over the years. She said it was her armor for cold rooms. I walked back to the dining room and draped it over the back of her empty chair. Slowly, with care. No one said a word. Not Dad, not Isolde. Not even Mom, who had followed me halfway before stopping in the doorway. I didn't need to stay another minute. I turned, walked down the hall, and climbed the stairs to the guest room. My heels echoed across the floor. One sound for every year I'd stayed silent. But tonight, they finally heard me. Funny how the ones they call ungrateful are usually the ones who gave the most. After the silence in the dining room, I took the stairs slowly. My footsteps barely made a sound on the old carpet. I paused at the end of the hall, where my old bedroom used to be. The door was half open. I hadn't seen that room in years, not since I packed up and left after Grandma passed. Back then, I thought I might be gone for a week, a month at most. But time has a funny way of pushing you out of places that don't want you anymore. The little wooden sign with my name was gone. In its place was a taped label that read, "Extra storage." I stepped inside. It hit me like a punch to the ribs. The room didn't just forget me, it never wanted to remember. My old bed was gone, replaced by a folded cot leaning against the wall. Stacks of boxes cluttered the floor, old lamps, dusty holiday wreaths, broken picture frames with stock images still inside. My childhood drawings, once taped above the desk with rainbow stickers, had been painted over with a bland beige that screamed neutral resale. A broken mirror rested in the corner. My reflection looked like someone who had wandered into a stranger's life. I used to dream in this room, about travel, art school, maybe even opening a bookstore one day. All that remained now was the faint outline on the carpet where my bed had been, a ghost print. I sat on the edge of an old ottoman, brushing my hand against a dusty lamp. The silence settled in around me, familiar in a way that still made my throat tighten. Then I heard her voice behind me. Well, well, the martyr returns. Isolde stood in the doorway, swirling wine in a crystal glass like she owned the place, which, to be fair, she probably thought she did. You always wanted attention, she said, stepping inside without being invited. I didn't move. No. I wanted to be seen. That's not the same. She laughed, sharp and dry. You think you were some kind of saint? Feeding Grandma soup? Reading to her like you were her only grandchild? I turned to face her. She was dying. I did what I hoped someone would do for me if I ever ended up that way. Isolde rolled her eyes. She was going to leave it to all of us, until you turned her against us. I stood then, slowly, not because I was angry, but because I'd had enough of her version of the truth. I didn't turn her, I said. You all erased yourselves. She froze. Something shifted in her expression, not quite fear, but a tremor in the certainty she always wore like a designer coat. What did she leave you? She asked, voice lowering. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled my wallet from my coat and took out a key, a long, old-fashioned skeleton key, polished but clearly aged. I held it up in the light. I didn't come back for revenge, I said, meeting her eyes. I came to close something, for peace. Isolde's eyes narrowed. Is that to her safe deposit box? Still, I didn't reply. I walked over to the dresser and placed the key on top, like setting down a truth I was done hiding. Isolde stood there, motionless, but I could see it. Her hand tightened around the stem of her wineglass. Her jaw clenched. I didn't need to say another word. I walked past her and back into the hallway, and that's where Mom was waiting. She stood stiff near the linen closet, arms crossed, the same way she used to wait when I broke curfew as a teen. Except this wasn't about a missed phone call. This was about control, about memory, and about what they'd buried. "You can't do this," she said, voice low, tight. I stopped. "Can't do what?" "Dig her up. Rewrite what's already been done." I studied her face. The lines around her mouth were deeper now, but her eyes, those eyes that used to tuck me in with lullabies, were cold. Not hateful, just empty. "I'm not rewriting anything," I said softly. "I'm just making sure what was buried comes back to light." She flinched. Maybe not physically, but something inside her recoiled. Like truth had touched a nerve she thought was long dead. She was old. She wasn't thinking clearly, Mom whispered. She got confused at the end. I tilted my head. Confused enough to leave me the key? The codes? Her letters? Letters? I didn't respond. Let the silence speak for me. For once, she had nothing left to say. And so I walked. Past her. Past the guest room. Past the framed family portrait that still didn't include me, even though I was standing right there the day it was taken. Behind the camera, of course. Downstairs again. Through the kitchen. Out the back door. The cold hit me like a truth I'd known all along. Sharp, clean, undeniable. I crossed the lawn and stood by the old tree in the corner. The swing Grandma built was still there, though the rope looked newer. Maybe someone had replaced it. Maybe not. I sat on it, slowly. Let the wood creak beneath me like it used to when she'd push me as a child. "Higher, Kaylin," she'd laugh. "Reach the stars!" I looked up. The sky was clear. Dozens of stars blinking down like tiny secrets. I pulled out my phone, opened the voicemail she left me the winter before she passed. I hadn't listened to it in years, but tonight I needed her voice more than air. "Kaylin," she said, soft and warm, "you always told me the stars would show you the truth. I think I see it now." And so did I. I whispered those words into the quiet air as the cold morning rolled in over the rooftops. I hadn't slept. Not really. I stayed on the old swing in the backyard until the sky turned that pale shade of orange that only comes right before the sun rises over tired houses and heavier hearts. By 8:15 a.m., I was driving along the tree-lined streets of Monrovia, California, window cracked just enough to feel the crisp air on my face. The strip mall I pulled into wasn't anything special. Faded signage, empty parking spots, and a donut shop that looked like it hadn't updated its menu since 1994. There, in dull blue lettering on a frosted glass door, Tobias Fields, Family Law. I took a breath before stepping inside. The waiting area was quiet. No receptionist. Just the low hum of an old floor fan and the smell of lemon cleaner clinging to faux leather chairs. A few magazines were neatly arranged on the coffee table, untouched. Then, from the hallway, a soft voice called out, "Kaylin?" I turned and saw her, Aunt Millie. I barely recognized her at first. She looked like a shadow of the woman in my memories, but her eyes were the same, sharp, a little sad, and far too observant. "I didn't think you'd actually come," she said, offering a tired smile. "But I'm glad you did." She led me back to a small office where the blinds were drawn halfway and stacks of old file folders leaned like tired bricks along the wall. A man in his 60s, Mr. Tobias, I presumed, nodded at me politely but didn't speak. Millie closed the door gently behind us. "She made me promise not to come to the funeral," Millie whispered, voice low like a confession. "But she also made me promise to give you this." She reached into her oversized handbag and pulled out a thick envelope, yellowed around the edges. My name was scrawled across it in Grandma's distinct handwriting. My fingers hesitated before I reached for it. For Kaylin. Only her. It felt heavier than paper should. I looked at Millie, who simply nodded. Mr. Tobias cleared his throat. "She came in a year ago. Alone. Told us exactly what she wanted. We notarized everything. It's all legal." I opened the envelope. Inside was a small stack of papers, an official-looking will with seals and stamps, a handwritten letter folded 3 times, and a grainy photo that made my breath hitch. It was the three of us, Grandma, Millie, and me, sitting on a porch I couldn't quite place, all of us laughing. My head was thrown back, Millie's hand on my shoulder, and Grandma's eyes squinting in the sun. We looked happy, real, like a family. I unfolded the letter. My Kaylin, if you're reading this, then I've left before I could say goodbye properly. I never was good at leaving gently. But you stayed. Through the sickness, the cold meals, the endless doctor visits. They came from my things, not my heart. But you gave yours freely. I rewrote my will. Everything is yours now. The house, the land in Montana, the savings. I know it'll cause trouble. But you're strong. You always were. Even when they made you feel like dust under their shoes. Keep this photo. It's my favorite. Love you more than they ever bothered to ask. Grandma. My hands were trembling, but I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it felt like the first time someone saw me and said, "You're enough." The room was silent as I finished reading. Mr. Tobias stood, cleared his throat again, and walked toward a filing cabinet. He began pulling the necessary forms, but I barely registered his movements. I was still staring at Grandma's handwriting, letting the weight of her words settle into the hollowness I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for years. "You should know," Millie said gently. "Your mother will fight this." "She can try," I replied, folding the letter and placing it back into the envelope. "But this time I brought my own fire." Millie gave a small smile, something caught between grief and pride. As we stepped out of the office, the morning sun hit my face. It was warm now, like the world had shifted just slightly in my favor. I sat in my car, hands resting on the steering wheel. My phone buzzed, a message from Isolde. "Mom's looking for you. Said you left something important." I stared at the text for a long moment, then deleted it. I didn't leave anything behind. Not anymore. I started the engine, pulled out of the lot, and merged onto the road back toward the house. It was time to go back. But not as their guest, this time as its owner. By the time I turned back onto our street, the sky had slipped fully into dusk. The pale lavender light had drained into deeper purples, and the sharp silhouettes of our neighbors' olive trees cast long shadows across the sidewalk. I hadn't driven this road in months. Somehow, I remembered every crack in the pavement. I parked along the curb, not in the driveway. That spot had always been reserved for family, as Mom liked to say. As I stepped out and closed the door behind me, I caught a flicker of movement through the front window. Isolde's legs stretched across the couch, Dad slouched in his usual recliner. I didn't ring the doorbell. I knocked. Twice. Not a timid tap. A deliberate sound. A few moments passed. Then I heard the familiar shuffle of slippers on tile, followed by the soft clink of ice in a glass. Mom opened the door, wineglass in hand, wearing a silk robe too bright for the hour. She looked at me like I'd shown up with a bucket of rain. "Forgot something?" she asked coolly. I didn't step inside yet. "No. I'm here to reclaim something." Her eyebrows lifted just slightly, then lowered into a tight, polite line. "Is that so?" She moved aside without another word. I stepped into the hallway that smelled faintly of lemon oil and tension. The same fake smiles from old family portraits stared at me from the wall. Dad was halfway through a bag of pretzels, watching a replay of a college football game from a week ago. He didn't even glance up. Isolde was on the sectional, legs crossed, scrolling through her phone. Her shoes were up on the coffee table, something I used to get scolded for as a kid. I walked past them both, calm and steady, and laid the envelope on the dining table. The same table where I used to set placemats and peel potatoes while they entertained the real family in the next room. Dad finally looked up, his voice gruff. "What's this supposed to be?" I met his eyes evenly. "Grandma's will. The real one." That got their attention. Mom nearly choked on her wine. Isolde sat upright so fast her phone slipped from her lap and hit the floor with a dull thud. She snatched the papers and started reading, her eyes darting, scanning line after line. Her hands trembled, No, Mom said, her voice suddenly sharp, too loud for the quiet house. She wasn't in her right mind. That's not valid. You can't just show up and… It's notarized, witnessed, filed with Tobias Fields last year, I said evenly. The house, the land in Montana, the savings account, all of it, mine. Dad pushed himself up from the recliner with a grunt, the remote falling to the carpet. We took care of her, he barked. You played nursemaid, what, twice a week? We were the ones here, handling the real stuff. I didn't flinch. You locked her in the guest room and pretended it was care. She told me about the cold meals, about the missed meds. You didn't take care of her. You waited. Isolde made a small sound, part scoff, part panic. You think this changes anything? It's just a piece of paper. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. I figured you might say that. I tapped the screen. The video played, soft, crackling audio, but clear. Mom's voice first. We'll just keep her comfortable until it's over. Then we can sell. Then Isolde. That Montana land alone could clear our debts. And finally, Dad. Don't tell Kaylin. She'll want a cut. The silence that followed was unlike any I'd ever known in that house. It wasn't just shock. It was exposure. The kind that peels skin from secrets. Mom's face went pale, the blood draining so quickly I thought she might faint. Isolde's lips parted, but no sound came. Dad stepped forward once, then stopped, his mouth open and jaw tight. His chest rose and fell faster than before, but the anger in his eyes had changed. It wasn't dominance anymore. It was fear. You didn't just erase me, I said quietly, tucking the phone away. You exposed yourselves. No one said a word. The television kept playing some forgotten game, but it might as well have been static. I picked up the will and tucked it back into the envelope. Looked around the room one last time. I'm not kicking you out tonight, I said, my voice calm but unshakable. I want you to feel it, what it's like to sleep in a house that doesn't want you here. Mom's lip twitched, but she didn't speak. I stepped toward the front door, hand on the knob, and added, but tomorrow, the locks change. I walked out without looking back. The air outside felt cleaner than I remembered. Funny thing about locks, sometimes you change them, sometimes you melt them shut. I didn't sleep much that night, not out of anxiety, no. I slept lightly because my body had grown used to alertness, years of brushing off slights, of being cautious in my own home, of learning how silence could slap harder than words. By dawn, I was dressed, folder in hand, coat buttoned, and keys ready. I parked a few houses down. Not because I was hiding, just because I didn't want to waste a second waiting for them to move their cars. The air was cool, still carrying that sleepy quiet of early morning in Pasadena. No gardeners out, no neighbors walking dogs, just the crunch of my shoes on the walkway and the soft hum of an idling van. The locksmith was already there, standing on the steps, arms crossed over his navy hoodie. He greeted me with a nod and a simple, "All done, ma'am. Here's the new set." I took the keys and thanked him, then turned toward the door that used to stay locked from the inside. It opened smoothly this time. No hesitation. My footsteps echoed against the walls as I stepped in, louder than I expected. There was a strange hollowness to the house now, a tension that wasn't mine anymore. I set my folder on the kitchen island. The counter still had that faint lemony scent from all the cleaners Mom loved, but never used herself. I raised my voice, calm but deliberate. "Morning." No one answered, but I caught the rustle of voices upstairs, the kind of whispering that gets louder the harder it tries to stay hidden. I didn't wait for them. I opened the folder, pulled out the certified letters, and laid them out side by side, 3 envelopes, addressed and sealed. Each one contained a formal 72-hour eviction notice. Not handwritten, not petty, legal, final. Just as I finished arranging them, I heard the front door creak open again. "Kaylin?" a voice called out. It was Dana, the real estate agent I'd met last month. Polished, sharp, efficient. She stepped in, heels clicking softly against the floor, holding a clipboard and tablet. "Go ahead," I told her. "Photos will come later. We're just getting the paperwork started today." She gave me a look, professional but curious, and stepped out again to make a call, likely arranging the stager. I didn't need it to look like home. I just needed it to look available. The pounding on the stairs came next. Delia, my mother, burst down in a satin robe, hair still pinned in rollers, fury carved deep into every line of her face. "You can't do this!" she shouted. I didn't flinch. "It's already done." Her eyes darted to the papers. "No judge would let this happen. We have rights." I slid a copy of the signed listing agreement across the island. "House is filed, listed, and I don't need your permission anymore." She stared at it like it might catch fire. Behind her, Gordon appeared, shirtless, red-eyed, breathing like he'd run a marathon. "I gave you everything," he barked. "You'd be nothing without me." I looked at him, tired of that performance. "No, Grandma gave me everything. You just lived off her and collected rent checks." He blinked. Just once. But the silence that followed wasn't a pause. It was a crumble. Isolde's footsteps were softer. She descended slowly, fully dressed, makeup smeared from crying or not sleeping. She clutched her phone like it might protect her. "Can't we at least talk this through?" she asked. Her voice sounded rehearsed, pleading but hollow. I turned to her, steady. "Talk? Like you did when you erased her pictures from the hallway? Or when you toasted to being debt-free, right after we buried her?" Her mouth opened slightly, then shut. No words came. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and hit play on the voicemail. Grandma's voice, shaky but clear. "If they ever try to steal what's yours, take it back with dignity. But don't leave them whole." The room went still. No one moved. Not even the clock ticking above the microwave dared interrupt her voice. I put the phone away. Gordon stepped back. Delia leaned on the counter like it might hold her up, and Isolde just stared at her feet. I walked to the fireplace. On the mantel sat a silver picture frame. Me as a baby, Grandma holding me, both of us laughing. They hadn't thrown that one out. Maybe they'd forgotten. Or maybe it hurt too much to look at. I knelt, opened my folder again, and pulled out a different document. The forged will, the one Delia had submitted to probate last fall, trying to rewrite Grandma's wishes. She'd used old letterhead, forged a signature that barely resembled the real one, and added a clause that would hand everything to her and Isolde, because I was not mentally stable enough to manage inheritance. I fed it into the flames. It curled immediately, darkening at the edges, then flaring orange and red. The fake ink blistered as it burned. The smell of scorched paper rose, mixing with citrus-scented air. No one stopped me. I stood, looked each of them in the eye. "You built an empire on silence," I said. "I'm just making the silence louder." They didn't respond, and that was the loudest thing of all. Outside, the sun had risen fully now, casting warm light through the windows that hadn't seen truth in years. I turned to Dana, who had just stepped back in, tablet ready. "Listed above market," I said. "If they want it back, let them pay full price, for once." I picked up my coat and walked toward the front door. Behind me, I heard Isolde's knees hit the floor as she collapsed into a chair, sobbing. The fireplace still crackled behind me when I stepped out into the sunlight. I didn't look back. Not at the kitchen, not at the letters, not at the silence. The house was mine now. But the past? That was a whole other inheritance I wasn't done unpacking. 2 weeks later, I stood in a small community art space in Pasadena, one of those quiet buildings that used to be a church, but now smelled like fresh paint and eucalyptus cleaner. Morning light spilled in through stained glass windows, warming the floor and casting dappled patterns across rows of tables and makeshift display walls. On each display, I laid pieces of Grandma Liza's life, carefully curated. A black and white photo of her as a young girl, barefoot on a wooden porch in Georgia. A half-finished patchwork quilt folded beside it. Sketches she drew in the margins of old church programs, faces, flowers, sometimes just swirls that turned into beauty when you stepped back. Her handwritten recipes in looping script. The tag below each item read, "Liza Bennett, unseen, unspoken, unforgettable." I was pinning the last placard beside a framed letter, one she'd written to a women's shelter but never sent. When I heard the door creak open behind me, "Kaylin?" a voice called, soft but certain. I turned to see Aunt Millie, clutching a grocery store bouquet of daisies and snapdragons. She walked in, looking smaller than I remembered, though maybe that was just the way grief wraps around people. "She would have loved this," Millie said, placing the flowers near the entrance. I gave her a tired smile. "She's here, in every frame, in every stitch." Millie took a long breath. "She always said stories don't get lost. They just wait for someone to tell them right." I nodded, and today, finally, I was ready to tell them. By noon, the space had filled slowly. Quiet footsteps, hushed voices, curious eyes. Some people looked familiar in that fuzzy way old neighbors and churchgoers do after 10 years. Others were strangers. Until they stepped close to the displays and something in their face softened. A tall woman in a USC hoodie paused at the photo of Grandma serving soup in the church kitchen. "Liza knitted blankets for the shelter. Every winter," she said aloud, maybe to herself. "She'd drop them off without a name tag, just leave them at the door." A man in scrubs held up one of Grandma's handwritten poems, his eyes brimming. "She paid my son's first semester tuition," he whispered. "Said it was just found money, never wanted a thank you." And there it was, layer by layer, story by story. Grandma's real legacy started unfolding, not the one written in legal documents or bitter wills, but the one etched into people's lives like hidden ink coming to light. I felt the sting behind my eyes and blinked hard. "She helped more people than we'll ever know," I murmured. Aunt Millie leaned beside me, her voice low. "And yet your mama called her a drain, said she was tired of playing nursemaid." I clenched my jaw, not out of anger, but something deeper. Shame, maybe. Forever believing, even for a moment, that they saw Grandma clearly. Then, just as the hum of conversation grew steady, it happened. The gallery door opened sharply, and in walked Delia, my mother, in a beige suit like she was headed to a city council meeting. Gordon trailed behind her, trying to look composed, though the lines around his mouth gave him away. They scanned the room, and when their eyes landed on the displays, their faces darkened. "This is slander," Delia hissed, her heels clicking against the concrete floor as she marched up to the quilt wall. "You're dragging family dirt through town like it's some parade float." I didn't even need to say anything. The gallery manager, a tall man in a linen shirt named Hugo, approached with a calm authority. "Ma'am, this is a private reservation. Guests are by invitation." Delia turned to me, voice raised. "This is what you do with your inheritance? Public humiliation?" I met her eyes, steady. "This isn't about you." She opened her mouth again, but before she could fire back, a woman with a press badge and a recorder in hand stepped beside her. "Delia Shaw?" the reporter asked. Delia's face froze. Gordon stepped in between them, but too late. "We're looking into a forged will filed under your name after Ms. Liza Bennett's passing." "Care to comment on that for the record?" The reporter didn't even blink. Delia's skin went gray. Gordon stammered something about legal representation, but no one listened. I turned back to the exhibit. Let the world watch them squirm. I didn't need to scream. The silence, and truth, was loud enough. A few minutes later, they were gone. Just like that. Like shadows when the lights come on. Later, as the last visitors finished weaving through the displays, I stood near the podium, hands resting on a folded paper I hadn't planned to read from. But then I saw Millie nod, and something told me this was the moment. I stepped up. My grandmother wasn't loud. She didn't ask for praise. She didn't leave behind diamonds or trust funds. What she left was harder to claim, but richer. I paused, scanning the faces. She was called a burden, a senile old woman, a problem to be managed. But she was never the problem. She was a builder, of dignity, of resilience. Of beauty in quiet corners. Some in the crowd were already wiping tears. "She didn't leave me money," I said. "She left me a map, a way to live, with courage, even when it's lonely, with kindness, even when it's unseen. All I had to do, was be brave enough to follow it. There was no applause at first, just stillness, that reverent hush that falls in a church when someone speaks from the bone. Then, slowly, hands came together. Applause spread like a wave, not loud, but full, honest. As people began to trickle out, many paused to leave notes on the table near the door. Memories, thank yous, some bills folded into donation envelopes for the local shelter in her name. I lingered behind, straightening placards, gathering papers, and then, just before I left, I stepped toward the last framed photo near the exit. It was a candid shot, me and Grandma in the garden, planting tomatoes in mismatched gloves, dirt on our cheeks, sun in our hair. We were laughing, not at anything in particular, just together. Aunt Millie came beside me and smiled. "You look just like her, you know." I touched the glass gently, my fingers resting over Grandma's smile. "Maybe it's time to plant again." I went back to the house the next morning, with seeds in one pocket and court summons in the other. The sun hadn't fully broken through yet, and the air still carried that in-between stillness, like even the wind wasn't sure if it was welcome just yet. I slipped through the side gate quietly, like a guest in my own space. The backyard was overgrown, patches of dry weeds where tomato vines once reached toward the sky, a broken trellis leaning like it had given up too. But under all that, I knew the soil was still good. I dropped my bag on the steps, pulled on gardening gloves that were a size too big, probably Grandma's, and knelt at the edge of the old beds. My knees sank into the soft dirt, and I just stayed there for a while, letting the silence wrap around me, letting the past breathe beside me. Then, I got to work. I pulled weeds first. Dandelions, crabgrass, the stubborn runners of mint she never planted, but always let be. I turned the soil with a hand spade, the same one she used, worn down at the edge like a crescent moon. And then I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the tiny paper envelope. "Liza's last summer," it read in her handwriting. Inside were heirloom tomato seeds, dry and flat, but still full of promise. I dropped them gently into the ground, one by one, covered them, pressed down the dirt, and then whispered, "We're home again, Grandma." A breeze moved through the yard like an answer. I didn't stay long after that. Just enough to rinse off the dirt from my hands, change into a gray pantsuit, and grab the folder I'd been building for months. Photos, letters, audio files, notarized records, all the things they tried to hide. All the things that were never supposed to see the light. By 10 a.m., I was downtown, seated at a long table in a courtroom that felt both colder and smaller than I expected. The kind of place where everything echoes, even thoughts. My lawyer, Mr. Durant, sat to my right, calm and prepared. He looked more like a librarian than an attorney, wire glasses, navy blue tie, soft voice, but I trusted him more than anyone in that room. Across from me, Delia, Gordon, and Isolde took their seats. If guilt had a color, they wore it like skin. Their movements were rigid, eyes hollowed, lips drawn tight. The judge, an older woman with a stern jaw and no time for theatrics, began without much preamble. "The court has reviewed the submitted video evidence, audio recordings, and both versions of the will," she said, her voice echoing slightly. "There is clear and compelling proof that the second document was forged." Delia stiffened. Gordon blinked hard. Isolde crossed her arms as if folding herself away from the mess. Mr. Durant rose. "We also have documented transfers of funds from Mrs. Bennett's personal accounts into accounts managed by her daughter and son-in-law over the course of 8 years, totaling $216,000. He paused, then added softly, "With no written consent, no financial agreement, and no repayment." Delia shot up from her seat. She was losing her mind. She didn't know what she was doing. The judge held up a hand. But I didn't wait. I turned, met Delia's eyes, and spoke clearly. She remembered everything, including who broke her heart. Delia didn't respond. She just sat down, slowly, almost like something in her spine had finally snapped. An hour passed in formalities, exhibits logged, statements read, objections raised and overruled, but the truth was already carved into the room. There was nothing left to bend. Then came the verdict. "The forged will is hereby nullified," the judge declared. "Ms. Kaylin Shaw is confirmed as the rightful owner of the estate and sole beneficiary of the original trust, as submitted by legal counsel and verified by Mr. Lionel Mathers." I turned toward the back of the room. And there he was, Mr. Mathers, Grandma's former attorney, white beard, cane resting beside his leg, and a small, knowing nod in my direction. The judge continued, "Mr. Gordon Keller and Ms. Delia Shaw are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $216,000, adjusted for interest. Additionally, permanent restraining orders will be issued, effective immediately." The sound of the gavel falling was sharp and final. Delia's gasp was audible. Gordon let out a whisper under his breath. This wasn't supposed to happen. But it did. And I was still standing. As the courtroom emptied, they left quickly, like smoke after a fire. No one looked me in the eye. I didn't rush. I collected my documents, thanked Mr. Durant, and stepped outside. The sky had changed while we were in there. The clouds were thinner now, stretched like gauze. The light was warm again. I drove home slowly, through streets I'd walked as a kid, past places that still held the ghosts of arguments and Sunday dinners and promises never kept. Back at the house, I stood for a long while in front of the door. The old knob still hung crooked from the lock, brassy and loose, like it no longer belonged. I took out the new set. It clicked into place easily. I didn't slam the door shut. I just closed it, like turning a page. Upstairs, I placed the court ruling next to Grandma's journal, the one I hadn't dared to open since the night I found it in the cedar chest. But now, I did. The last entry was written in faint ink, the kind that soaks through time. "Kaylin is light in a long tunnel. I only hope the world is kind to her when I'm not here." I didn't cry. I just held it. Let it rest in the air. The sun dipped low as I stood by the window. In the garden, where I had pressed the soil that morning, I saw it. A small green shoot, just breaking through. One tomato sprout. Just one. But it was enough. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Tomorrow, I'd decide what to do with the Montana land. I thought the story ended in court. But justice, real justice, has roots. That afternoon, I was back home, standing at the kitchen sink rinsing dirt from my fingers. The light streamed in through the kitchen window, softer than usual, filtered through the old lace curtain Grandma had always insisted on keeping. For a moment, I just stood there, water running, heart still. I wasn't sure what drew me to the fireplace. Maybe it was a breeze, or the memory of her sitting in that old chair by the hearth with tea in hand and secrets in her eyes. I ran my hand along the brickwork like I had done 1,000 times as a kid, hunting for fairy doors. But this time, something shifted. A soft click, barely audible. A brick, slightly loose. I pulled it forward carefully. Behind it was a small manila envelope, yellowed with age and sealed with a dab of red wax. Across the front, written in Grandma Liza's looping script, were the words, "For Kaylin, when they're gone." My breath caught in my chest. I sat at the table, fingers trembling slightly as I broke the seal. Inside were two things, a folded letter and something small, hard, and metal wrapped in an old handkerchief. I opened the letter first. "My Kaylin, if you're reading this, it means the truth has come out, and you stood tall when the weight tried to crush you. I always knew you'd be the seed that would break through the concrete. They said you were too soft, too quiet, but I saw strength in you the way I saw roots push up through sidewalks, steady, silent, unstoppable. I left something behind, not just money, not just land, but something I couldn't give while I was alive. I had to wait until you saw yourself the way I always did. Go. Find it. It's yours. I didn't realize I was crying until the ink on the letter blurred beneath a tear. I wiped my face gently with the same handkerchief I'd unwrapped from the metal object, and then I looked at what else she had left me. A rusted key? And underneath it, tucked into the envelope's corner, was a property deed, with coordinates pointing to Montana. I booked a flight that night. 2 days later, I stood at the edge of the 10-acre property in rural Montana. The air smelled like pine needles and clean soil, and the wind carried the quiet you only find in places untouched by noise. At the center of the land sat a weather-worn storage shed with a brass plaque above the door that read, "Liza's Vault." The key fit perfectly. The lock gave way with a loud metallic sigh. Inside, the air was dry and cool. Boxes lined the walls, neatly labeled in Grandma's handwriting. 1963, Paris. 1982, legal records. Do not touch unless you're Kaylin. That last one made me smile through a wave of emotion. I opened it carefully. Inside was a preserved jewelry collection, vintage pieces wrapped in silk pouches, and beneath them, an accordion folder with documents. My eyes widened as I flipped through them. Diversified accounts, land titles, high-value bonds, all totaled. Over $3.1 million, quietly saved. No one had known, not even the family. And then I found it. A single black velvet box, heavy in the palm. It wasn't labeled like the others, just a small card tucked beneath the ribbon that read, "For your own hand, not anyone else's." I opened it slowly. Inside was a diamond ring. Oval cut, vintage setting, elegant and impossibly brilliant. I'd seen it once before, years ago in an art magazine. It was one of 5 ever made, worth nearly $70 million. But what made my breath catch wasn't the diamond. It was the note folded beneath the lid. Let them see it when they mock you, but only you know its worth isn't in carats. It's in what you carried to deserve it. I didn't say anything out loud at first. I just stood there, heart pounding, holding that box like it was made of light. Then I whispered, "Thank you for trusting me when no one else would." I slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. That night, I didn't go to a hotel. I stayed on the property, wrapped in a flannel blanket under the stars. There was no signal, no internet, just me, the crickets, and the weight of a love I never got to fully thank in life, but felt in every breath of that mountain air. When I returned to Pasadena, it was late afternoon. The house welcomed me quietly. I dropped my suitcase inside the door and wandered to the guest room, Grandma's old space. It had stayed untouched for years. But now, I made the bed fresh with soft white sheets, laid one of her quilts, embroidered with the word "breathe," across the end, and placed a book on the nightstand, one of hers, worn pages, notes in the margins. I imagined her smiling at the choice. Outside, the tomato garden was coming alive, tiny green stalks pushing skyward, leaves unfurling like small flags of victory. I crouched beside them and ran my fingers over the soil. Still soft. Still good. I didn't know yet if I'd sell the house or stay. But for the first time in my life, it didn't feel like I was living in some